The village always woke with the sound of the sea. Waves rolled against the sand in their endless rhythm, a steady drumbeat that marked the passing of days. At dawn, the air smelled of salt and wet earth, of yam fields waiting to be worked, of cassava bread baking in clay ovens. Children's laughter usually broke across the morning quiet, chasing chickens between narrow dirt paths, while fathers and mothers bent their backs in the soil, coaxing life from the earth with hands that had known only hard work and prayer. It was life in its most unadorned form, fragile, unshielded, but beautiful in the way only honest living can be. Amara Oak stood at the edge of the field that morning, her bare feet pressed into the cool soil, watching her younger brother Daniel chase after a goat that had escaped its tether. He was all arms and legs, still a boy, but with the stubbornness of a man. His voice loud as he shouted at the animal in a mixture of English and Igbo. Their mother's laughter echoed behind them, rich and warm, calling him back to help carry firewood. For a moment, Amara thought of nothing beyond the brightness of the rising sun and the weight of another ordinary day. It should have been just another day. The sky tore open before the sun had fully climbed. At first, the villagers mistook the sound for a storm rolling over the sea, a low, metallic growl built from the horizon, strange and unnatural, rattling the air until birds scattered in frantic bursts of wings. Then came the shadows, vast and moving, blotting out the light as enormous shapes broke through the clouds. The people of the village froze where they stood, baskets half filled with cassava, machetes still in hand, children clutching at mother's wrappers. Amara's breath caught as the first ship descended, black metal glistening like oil, its surface alive with pulsing lights. It landed beyond the yam fields, crushing earth and crops under its monstrous weight, and then the sky rained fire. The world erupted. Blinding beams cut through thatched roofs, igniting them into roaring towers of flame. Trees exploded into splinters. Homes, carefully built with years of sweat and prayer, disintegrated in seconds. People screamed, not with confusion anymore, but with the sound of terror that comes when one understands death is at hand. Amara grabbed Daniel's hand, pulling him toward the forest, but soldiers poured from the ship before they could escape. They were not men, not anything human. The Threx Dominions, shock troops, towered over the villagers, armored in jagged exoskeletons of living metal, eyes like shards of frozen light. Their weapons spat, searing bursts of energy that cut people down where they stood. A farmer who tried to defend his children with a machete was burned into ash before his wife's eyes. Mothers clutched babies, fathers threw themselves in the way of blasts, and everywhere the air filled with smoke, screams, and the choking stench of burning flesh. Amara's mother shoved her forward through the chaos, her strong hands gripping her daughter's shoulders, her face streaked with sweat and soot. "Go, take your brother, run to the trees," she cried, her voice fierce and breaking at once. Daniel clung to Amara's arm, sobbing as the ground shook beneath them. They darted between burning huts, the heat blistering their skin, the screams of their neighbors echoing behind them. Then the shock troops swept in, methodical and merciless, corralling the children. Their long, clawed hands seized wrists and throats, dragging them from their families. Amara felt Daniel torn from her grip, both of them screaming, fighting with everything their small bodies could muster. But the alien grip was unyielding, cold, and final. They were herded into a line with others, boys and girls, no older than 17, wailing, thrashing, begging for their parents. Parents clawed at the soldiers, only to be struck down, their blood spilling into the soil that had once given them life. Amara's mother fought like a lioness, breaking past a soldier to seize Amara's hand again. For a fleeting second, their fingers touched, desperate and trembling. Then a blast tore through her chest. The sound was like thunder. Amara watched her mother stumble back, smoke rising from the wound, her bright eyes dimming. She fell to her knees, still looking at her children. Through the fire and ruin, her voice rose one last time, ragged but unbroken. Survive, live, remember who you are. And then she was gone, crumpled into the dirt, her blood soaking into the earth she had tended all her life. Amara screamed, her voice raw, tearing through the smoke. Daniel's cries split the air beside her, his small fists pounding helplessly against the armored chest of the soldier, dragging him away. The children were forced toward the towering maw of the ship, its metal ramp glowing red with heat. Behind them, the village collapsed into ruin, fields burning, livestock screaming. As they were cut down, the air was thick with ash. Fathers fell to their knees as their children were taken, their wails breaking against the unfeeling silence of their conquerors. Some tried to follow, only to be cut down in sprays of light, their bodies falling lifeless at the feet of their sons and daughters. Inside the ship, the children were crammed into metal cages, stacked one upon another, each large enough for only a body to sit, knees drawn to chest. The walls hummed with the vibration of alien machinery, the air thick with fear and the acrid stench of sweat and smoke carried in from the burning earth. Amara pressed against the bars, her eyes burning with tears, searching desperately for Daniel. He was shoved into a cage across from her, his small face streaked with soot and terror, his eyes wide and wet. "Amara," he cried, reaching through the bars with his hand. She reached back, their fingers barely brushing through the narrow gap. "I'm here, Donnie. I'm here. Hold on." Her voice cracked, but she forced strength into it, because she had to. The ship trembled as it lifted from the ground, engines roaring like a beast, devouring the sky. The children screamed as the earth fell away, their cries mingling with the sound of destruction below. Through a narrow slit in the metal wall, Amara caught a final glimpse of home. The village was nothing but fire now, the yam fields blackened, the huts collapsing into ash, smoke spiraling upward like mourning cloths into the heavens. She saw the coastline, once bright with life, now scarred with fire. For a moment, the curve of the earth glowed beneath them, beautiful and fragile against the vast dark, and then it was gone, swallowed by space. Silence settled in the cage, broken only by muffled sobs and the steady hum of alien engines. The children sat huddled, their small bodies shaking, their eyes wide with the weight of a grief too large for their years. Amara leaned her head against the cold bars, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. She could still hear her mother's voice, echoing in her mind like a commandment carved into her soul. "Survive. Live. Remember who you are." She closed her eyes against the burning image of her mother falling, of the flames consuming everything they had ever known. Beside her, Daniel whimpered, curling into himself in the small cage, his hands still reaching weakly toward hers. And, above the silent, shattered earth, the ship of the Threx Dominion carried them into the unknown, a cargo of broken children stolen from the ashes of their world. 10 years inside. Varix 9 had carved Amara Oak into something unrecognizable from the girl who once stood barefoot in yam fields by the sea. The colony was no place for softness. It was a place built to grind children into tools, to strip away memory, and to hammer out identity until only obedience remained. Metal walls, endless drills, rations of tasteless paste, and punishments that left scars not only on flesh but on the spirit. Yet Amara had endured. At 27 she carried herself with the weight of command, though no title had ever been given. Her eyes were sharp, the softness of youth long burned away by fire and grief. She spoke little, and when she did, it was with precision. Her voice even, steady, the voice of someone who understood that words could keep hope alive or kill it outright. The memory of her mother's last command still lived inside her, like an ember. "Survive, live, remember who you are." It was that ember that had kept her from breaking. It was that ember that made others follow her, though no chains bound them together, except the invisible ones the Dominion forged. Daniel was fire, where Amara was stone, At 23, he was tall, broad-shouldered, his frame hardened from years of forced labor, but his spirit remained untamed. His rage had never cooled from the night their village burned. If anything, it had grown sharper, more volatile. Fed each day by the humiliations and cruelty of the Threks, he was clever, quick-thinking in ways that often outpaced the guards themselves, but reckless with his defiance. Where others kept their heads bowed to avoid punishment, Daniel would spit in the face of his captors. It made him a target, again and again, and Amara had lost count of the nights she sat outside the infirmary, listening to his muffled groans after yet another beating. Still, he would not break. His fury was his shield, his proof that they had not erased him. But Amara feared that one day his fury would be his end. Among their stolen family of captives, others had become part of their fractured community. Kira, Morgan, who had been only 12 when she was taken, had grown into a woman with a quiet resilience. Her American accent was softer now, worn down by years of sharing words with children from across the earth, but she carried with her a kind of gentleness that never fully died. Where Amara's sharpness cut and Daniel's fire burned, Kira was water, patient and soothing. She would murmur songs at night, half-forgotten lullabies from her childhood, weaving comfort out of sound in a place designed to erase music. For many, she had become the heart of their group, the one who reminded them they were not only survivors, but human. Then there was Sefu Kamau, once a farmer from Kenya, now a man weathered into something like an elder, though the Dominion allowed no elders in their hierarchy. He had been taken in his 30s, and now the streaks of gray in his hair marked him as one of the few who had lived long enough to carry the memory of Earth into middle age. Sefu was patient, slow to anger, deliberate in thought. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who once tilled soil with his hands and knew the cycles of planting and harvest. In the dark corners of Varix 9, he became the closest thing the captives had to a father, guiding with stories, offering wisdom drawn from seasons long gone. His presence reminded them that endurance was not weakness, that survival itself was a form of resistance. The Dominion's cruelty was not only in the beatings, in the labor, but in the constant game of erasure. They would pit children against each other, forcing them to fight for food, for favor, for survival, trying to shred the bonds of kinship and trust. They demanded they learn the Dominion tongue, forbade them from speaking their own, and punished them when caught whispering in Earth's languages. They told them that Earth was gone, that their families had surrendered, that no one would come. The goal was simple: to break their spirit, to make them tools who no longer remembered being human. But the captives refused. In the quiet moments, in the shadows of the barracks, rebellion thrived not with weapons, but with words. They passed down stories. Daniel would whisper the tales their mother once told them. Stories of tortoises outwitting stronger beasts, of tricksters who survived, not with strength, but with cleverness. Kira sang softly in the dark, humming American hymns that had traveled across centuries. Sefu told proverbs in Kiswahili, rolling them like seeds into young ears who might plant them later. Even Amara, though she seldom allowed herself softness, taught the youngest children words in Igbo, showing them how to say water, home, mother. To remember a language was to remember a world. That was the rebellion. That was survival. Still, the weight pressed heavier with each passing year. Amara felt it most keenly. She had become the one the others looked to in silence, though she had never asked for the role. It was in her stillness, in the way she carried pain without collapsing, in the way she never stopped planning, never stopped watching. But it also chained her. Every decision pressed like a stone on her chest. She could see what Daniel wanted: to strike back, to bleed the Dominion, to scream in their faces that they had not won. And sometimes she wanted it too. The thought of seizing a weapon, of cutting down just one of those armored soldiers, sent a pulse through her veins like lightning. But she could not yet. To rebel too soon was to be slaughtered, to lose everything they had preserved through a decade of suffering. She lived with the tension of a blade held at her throat, protect her people quietly, or risk all of them in a blaze that might mean nothing. It was Daniel who forced the clash into the open. After another beating, this one for stealing extra bread to give to a child too small to fight for his portion, he staggered back into the barracks, his lips split, his face swollen, his hands raw from chains. Enough, he spat, slamming his fist against the wall. How long will we sit and swallow their scraps, Amara? How long will we pretend survival is victory? They killed our families. They killed our mother. And you tell us to wait. Wait for what? His voice rang in the silence, each word like flint against stone. The younger ones flinched, but some eyes glimmered with the same fire. Amara met his gaze, her own face tight with the control she forced upon herself. Her chest ached at the mention of their mother, at the truth she could never shake. "You think I've forgotten?" she said, her voice low but sharp. "Every night I see her die. Every night I hear her words. Survive, live, remember who you are, not throw ourselves into their blades so they can laugh while we fall." Her voice cracked, but she did not let it falter. "Rebellion will come, Daniel, but not like this. Not on their terms. We are not ready." Daniel shook his head, his fists trembling at his sides, tears mingling with blood on his face. "You've turned her words into chains," he hissed. "She told us to live. You've forgotten how." He turned away, slamming his hand against the wall again, his rage filling the cramped space like smoke. The others sat in silence, the argument like a wound cut open in front of them. Kira looked between them, her eyes glistening, whispering something soft under her breath, a prayer or a plea. Sefu closed his eyes, breathing slow, his silence speaking volumes. Amara stood there, rigid, holding herself together even as she felt herself splintering inside. Later that night, when the others slept in uneasy silence, Amara sat alone in the corner of the barracks. She pressed her finger into the dirt floor, tracing lines slowly, carefully. First the curve of the coastline, then the fields, then the narrow paths between huts. She drew the outline of home, the village that had burned a decade ago, but still lived in her memory. Her hand trembled, but she refused to stop. She etched every line, as if carving it into her skin. When she finished, she sat back, staring at the shape of the place she had lost. Her chest tightened, her throat burned, but she whispered to herself in Igbo, the words soft and defiant, "I remember." And though no one else saw it, in that small act, Amara Oak waged her war. The announcement came on a day that began like every other in Varix 9, with the sharp clang of metal doors and the barked orders of guards dragging them from their bunks. The air smelled of sweat and rust, the stale breath of a prison that had never known sunlight. Amara had long since trained herself to move without hesitation, to keep her head lowered just enough to avoid drawing the wrong eyes, while keeping her senses sharp. Daniel walked beside her, his lips still scarred from the last punishment, his eyes smoldering as they always did. Around them shuffled the others, a dozen young men and women who had grown into adulthood inside these walls, their lives stripped down to survival. None of them suspected that this morning would shatter even the thin illusion of endurance they had clung to for years. The guards marched them into the central square, where a raised platform waited. Banners of the Dominion hung in strips of black and crimson, their symbols etched in jagged strokes that seemed to mock the very idea of hope. On the platform stood Commander Varix, the overseer of Varix 9, his tall, insectoid frame encased in armor that gleamed like obsidian. His mandibles clicked in measured rhythm as he surveyed the assembly, eyes cold with the detachment of someone who had overseen countless human lives reduced to nothing more than numbers. His voice carried through the amplifiers, harsh and guttural, in the Dominion tongue, but translated in mechanical tones that echoed across the yard. "Humans of Varix 9," the voice declared, "your training is complete. For years, you have been prepared for service. The Dominion promised you purpose. Now, that purpose is at hand. You will be deployed to the outer colonies as shock troops. You will march in the name of the Dominion. You will fight until you fall. Your blood will sanctify the expansion. Hey! Silence rippled through the crowd, suffocating and heavy. Some blinked in confusion, not understanding. Others understood too well. Shock troops, the first wave sent into battle, expendable by design, fodder for enemy guns. Amara felt her chest constrict, her fists clenching at her sides. Integration, they had said. A place in Dominion society, a chance to belong. Even she, who trusted nothing from their mouths, had clung to the faintest thread of possibility that survival might someday lead to something more than chains. Now the truth stood naked before them. They were not citizens. They were not equals. They were weapons to be used, bodies to be broken, nothing more. The fury inside Daniel, always simmering, ignited at once. He surged forward, breaking from the line before Amara could stop him. His voice thundered, raw with 10 years of swallowed rage. "We are not your slaves," he roared, his accent sharp, his words ringing in English, and not the Dominion tongue. "We are not fodder." His fist struck the nearest guard, a blow that resounded against metal plating, staggering the alien backward. For a moment, it was as if the whole square froze, every eye wide, every breath caught. Then chaos erupted. The guards descended on him, weapons raised. The first blow caught him across the back, sending him to his knees. Another strike to his ribs, another to his face, and he crumpled, blood spattering the dirt. They beat him with savage efficiency, as if to make an example of his body. Amara's heart lurched as she watched, her mind racing. For 10 years, she had restrained herself, had forced Daniel to restrain himself, had told herself that endurance was their rebellion. But watching her brother's body crumple under the boots of their captors, something inside her snapped. She shoved through the crowd, ignoring the gasps, ignoring the hands that tried to hold her back. She threw herself over Daniel's body, her arms spread wide. "Enough," she shouted, her voice cracking but unyielding. The guards froze for a fraction of a second, surprised at her defiance. Amara's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes burning with something that made even the Dominion hesitate. Varrix's gaze fixed on her, cold and assessing. For reasons she could not fathom, he raised his clawed hand, signaling the guards to stop. Daniel groaned beneath her, blood dripping from his mouth, his breath ragged. Amara's body shook with fear and rage, but she held his gaze, held the silence, daring them to continue. For the first time, she realized that if she did nothing, her people would die anyway. The Dominion had already signed their death warrant. Waiting, enduring, would mean only that they died obedient. That night, as the barracks settled into uneasy quiet, the decision clawed at her chest. Daniel lay beside her, his breathing shallow, his body broken but his spirit unbowed. Around them, the others whispered in fragments, fear heavy in the air. Amara's mind raced, her thoughts a storm of guilt, fury, and the weight of her mother's last words. She had promised herself to survive, but what good was survival if it ended with their lives thrown into battle like trash? She was trapped in the loop of her own silence when the door to the barracks slid open. A guard stepped inside. Amara tensed at once, bracing for punishment, but the figure moved differently, slower, almost hesitant. His armor was scuffed, his stance uncertain. He stopped in the shadows, his alien eyes flicking across the sleeping humans before fixing on Amara. His voice, low and urgent, broke the silence. "You are stronger than you know," he whispered in the Dominion tongue, then slipped a small bundle to the floor at her feet. She stared, stunned, her breath caught in her throat. The guard lingered only a moment longer, his mandibles clicking in something like hesitation, before he turned and vanished into the night. Amara's hands trembled as she opened the bundle. Inside were datapads, maps etched in alien script she had learned to read in secret, supply routes, patrol schedules, weaknesses. Her heart pounded as she realized what she held, the very veins of the Dominion's machine, exposed before her. For a long moment, she sat frozen, staring at the glowing lines, her chest heaving with disbelief. Then Daniel stirred beside her, his bruised face turning toward her, his swollen eyes narrowing. "What is it?" he rasped. She met his gaze, and for the first time in years, she let the fire inside her burn. "It's a chance," she whispered. "Our only chance." The decision settled on her like a mantle she had resisted for too long. They could not wait. They could not bend their heads and pray for survival any longer. The Dominion had marked them for death, and the only way to honor their stolen childhood, their murdered families, was to fight. Her mother's voice echoed again in her mind. "Survive. Live. Remember who you are." And for the first time, Amara understood. Survival was not hiding. Survival was not obedience. Survival was fighting until you carved life back from the hands that stole it. The next evening,